The Third Worst Year by TheFrancakes. Read by Ella Mabella. 5. 6 months left. Things didn't get much better for Draco by the halfway mark. The kitten calendar told him to follow your heart and your dream, but he really wasn't sure how to apply that to his current circumstances. He wasn't even sure he had a dream anymore. Once upon a time, he dreamt of a life of love and safety. He'd think about finally finding peace and not being constantly reminded of his fuck-ups as a child. Sometimes the dream ended with a family with the Malfoy name restored and honored after all his hard work as an auror. Now he could only think about the loneliness of the Romanian forests. And his heart? Well, he treaded that on his own. Ever since his fight with Potter, the two regarded each other with the same level of decorum they did right after the war. Draco mostly kept to himself, didn't speak unless spoken to, and hid in the background at every meeting. He knew it looked poor to the other aurors, that it looked like he didn't deserve to share the co-lead title, which, in his opinion, they'd be right. Draco did his best to mend the fence. He'd bring Potter a cup of coffee in the morning and leave it on his desk. For the first few days, Potter let the coffee go cold. But finally, one random day, he took a sip. A few days later, he murmured a thank you when Draco dropped it off. It wasn't much, but it still felt like the rock on the middle of his chest grew a touch lighter. Draco still wasn't exactly sure what he'd said wrong. Well, he knew he let his temper rise and brought them back to pointless snipes, like back at Hogwarts, but he wasn't sure what Potter was still so angry about. So he left without a goodbye. So he sat with Charlie Weasley. Why did that matter to Potter of all people? "He's still mad at you?" Pansy asked as she slid into a booth at the Leaky after work. Her dark eyes drifted from Potter at the bar back to Draco sitting across from her, a slight frown on her lips. "He's not anything with me," Draco clarified with a shrug. He let his silver eyes drift over to the bar. Potter sat next to Weasley, beer in his hand, laughing so hard at something his friend said. He was gorgeous. Draco looked away quickly before he was noticed. "I feel like you're not telling me something. I don't even understand what you did," the dark-haired woman said, sipping on a martini. "I've told you everything, I swear." Draco shrugged, and he was pretty sure he had, for the most part anyways. He might have left out the part about fucking Charlie Weasley and throwing it in Potter's face later. But what was it Potter's business that he fucked someone over a weekend holiday? Did he have to report all his conquests? Not that there were many. Draco was extremely picky, but still. As if reading his mind, Pansy gave him a look. "You should apologize." "For what?" Draco scoffed, though it was hollow and fake. He knew she could see right through his faux annoyance.
"Well, you obviously buggered this up somehow, and if he's your true love..."
She trailed off, smirking at her secret knowledge. "Say it a little louder, will you?" he snapped at her.
"Just say you'd like to understand what you did wrong so you can apologize and do whatever needed to get him bent over your desk," she cackled.
"Bent over my desk?" Draco asked, raising an eyebrow. Both former Slytherins turned to regard the man in question. Pansy tilted her head to the side as she sized the man up.
"I bet Minnie Weasley pecked him at least once,"
Pansy decided.
"Then again, with that scruff, I'd let him bend me over his desk, or couch, or the kitchen counter. Hell, even the bar he's leaning on right now."
"I'm not letting him bend me over anything," Draco grumbled with an eyebrow.
"Not with that attitude,"
corrected Pansy and took another sip of her drink.
"Looks like Weasley's using the loo. Go talk to him."
Before I could tell her no, she kicked him hard in the shin. He swore hard and gave her the finger, but stood up from the booth, if anything, to escape more violence from the witch. She never stopped at just one kick. Draco had met Pansy right after work, so he was still in his dress shirt and slacks, but had loosened his black tie and ruffled his hair since he'd seen Potter last. Just to give his nervous hands something to do, he rolled up his sleeves as he approached the bar, trying to come up with something to say. All he could come up with was, "Potter, a word?" The other man looked up from his drink, both not shocked to see Draco there, but also surprised to hear them speaking to each other. "Sure, Malfoy, I suppose so," Potter replied, trying to make his voice sound gruff and emotionless. "I want to set things right." he said, putting his hands in his pockets. He tried to repeat what Pansy had said. And I've been trying to figure out what exactly I've done wrong to cause...
You don't know,
Potter interrupted him. Well, I was crass and a touch rude. Draco tried to get back on track. And I'm sorry for that.
A touch?
Potter scoffed in a way he might have learned from Draco himself. I know I should have said goodbye that evening as well. Draco tried to keep his tone level, but he knew his frustration was seeping out. Potter bit his lip, internally debating something Draco couldn't make out.
That's not really why I'm hurt.
Draco's brow furrowed. Then why is it? I don't know what I've done to hurt you, but... Merlin, you're bloody awful at apologies. Still waiting for mine from the wall. Weasley cut in, returning to the bar. He was smiling, maybe even joking playfully, but a little confidence Draco had plummeted to the sticky bar floor. He felt embarrassment heat his cheeks.
Ron!
Harry chastised softly. No, he's right, I am. I just wanted to let you know I'm just sorry, and... Draco said, swallowing hard, but he couldn't say it, so he finished with, and yeah. He took a deep breath and focused on the space in front of him, refusing to let himself truly see Potter or Weasley. He would not break down in front of them. He would not be vulnerable, not here, not in front of Potter, not when he had only 6 months left. Like he always did, Draco quickly built his walls and defended himself from the emotions trying to break him. He looked up quickly at the man in front of him and gave a curt nod before leaving quickly. And I miss you, was what he wasn't brave enough to say. 202. Everyone I've heard, that's still alive at least. Katie Bell, Madame Rosmerta, Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, honestly, the whole bloody Weasley family, well, minus Charlie, obviously, Granger, Hagrid, Goyle, Myrtle, though she's technically dead, Mum, Potter times 1,000. I feel like I'm missing a lot of people. Fuck, I really am a dick. The entire wizarding world, and some muggles too. Oh, and that bloody hippogriff, if it's still alive. Christmas Eve. After the war, the manor had gone through a full renovation. Beyond the ministry completely destroying the place, looking for secret passageways and hidden dark magic artifacts, his mother decided to try to restore the manor back into a home. It worked for the most part, with her taste of warm neutral tones and soft plush furniture. All the portraits of relatives had been replaced with sunny landscapes and beautiful florals. All the dark wood was now light and no longer weighed down with books and artifacts, but personal family photos and knickknacks from travels. For Christmas, the house elves had decorated the entire manor with twinkle lights and decor in the same color scheme. Even the tree in the middle of what used to be the drawing room was white and sparkling with glitter and lights. Narcissa had even charmed the wrapping any present put under the tree to turn to a shade of her design. No tacky red and green for the Malfoy manor. Christmas Eve was a small affair compared to the large gatherings there used to be. Instead of all the pureblood families coming for a grand party, now it was only the 3 Malfoys, his Aunt Dromedar, and his cousin Teddy. It was a quiet night, and Draco found himself sitting in his childhood bedroom. Not much had changed since he moved out when he was 18. He almost had to laugh at the amount of dragon paraphernalia around the room. Posters, a mobile in the corner, even a nameplate on his door. He'd even come up with a Lumos spell that would light his ceiling in the Draco constellation when the lights turned out. There was a loud knock at the door, and it slammed open without any pretense. Draco might have been annoyed at the intrusion, but in the doorway stood Teddy, all dressed up in a holiday sweater and antlers with little lights on them.
Aunt Cissa won't let me open presents until everyone is by the tree,
announced the young boy haughtily. He had to be 6 or 7 by now. Draco wasn't exactly sure. Pretty rude of Aunt Cissa, Draco smirked. The boy nodded vigorously, not catching the sarcasm at all.
I know,
Teddy gasped and pouted. Draco chuckled and stood up from his bed. He took another look around the room, not sure if it'd be the last time he'd been in there. It still belonged to a teenager, but it also still felt a bit like home. He looked back at his cousin, his hair going from playful teal to a contemplative navy. He watched Teddy's eyes take in the room. "You can come in," Draco offered. Teddy slowly entered the room, drifting towards the dresser and bookshelves to look at all the photos and things he'd collected over the years. His fingers trailed over the wood of the dresser, leaving a trail in the dust. He poked at the photos, laughing when they got angry at his taps. Finally, he noticed Draco's broom hanging on the wall.
"You have the numbers 2001?"
Teddy gasped, his fingers ghosting over the numbers cut into the wood handle of the broom. "Yeah, it's not a fireball, but it won some games." Draco chuckled. He watched Teddy's fascination with the broom, and an idea came over him. "Do you want it?"
"Oh, really? I can have it?"
He gasped again. His hair turned a neon pink. Even Draco had to admit it was kind of cute. "Sure, I've got no use for it," Draco shrugged, walking over to his cousin and pulling the broom from its spot. "Has anyone shown you how to ride it yet?"
"Uncle Harry says he wants to, but Gwen keeps saying I'm too young."
Teddy explained with such exaggerated pouting you'd think he's been told he could never have ice cream again. "Ah, well, that's the difference between me and Potter. He asks for permission, I ask for forgiveness." He laughed and messed up Teddy's hair. The little boy's eyes grew as he processed this new way of life he'd never considered before. It was probably a recipe for disaster, but Draco liked knowing he caused a little chaos for once he was gone. "I'll show you after presents."
"Forget that! Let's go now! Nothing is going to be as cool as this!"
Teddy exploded with innocent excitement that turned his hair green like Muggle traffic lights. Draco wished he could still have that sort of excitement about anything these days. He vaguely felt it when he thought about Potter, but he knew that was just a broken dream these days. "All right," Draco said, his smile matching Teddy's, grabbing 2 jackets from his closet and throwing one to Teddy. "Right, now it is." A few days later. The rest of Draco's Christmas holidays had been quiet. He spent the days with his parents, sitting by the fire and reading quietly. Most would find the time boring, but Draco found it warm and peaceful, comforting. It was a few hours that he could sit without the word breathing down his neck. He knew he'd eventually have to tell his parents the bad news, but he still couldn't bring himself to break his mother's heart. He didn't want her thinking he just up and left one day, but he couldn't imagine her attempting to visit him in his dragon form like he knew she would. He didn't want to see her tears again. He returned to work the next day to a mountain of paperwork on his desk from whoever was stuck on desk duty. Most of the time, he'd split it between him and Potter, but ever since the bar, he'd backed off. Draco had his head buried in paperwork when a cup of black coffee was set on his desk. He looked up to see Potter smiling down at him softly. Draco raised an eyebrow questioningly.
"Happy Christmas."
Potter greeted him, a wary smile like he wasn't sure he was allowed to speak. "Happy Christmas." Draco nodded back, the same wariness to his own voice. Potter made his way to his own desk and plopped in his chair, but dawdled about not getting to any actual work.
"Teddy won't shut up about you know,"
Potter finally said, breaking the ice a bit harder this time. "Me? He's usually all about you," Draco said, setting his pen down and leaning back in his chair, welcoming a conversation between friends again, finally.
"Oh no, now it's Draco's amazing at flying and Draco's so cool and he's going to beat me as a first-year seeker because Draco taught him how to dive in the snow."
Potter prattled on much like Teddy had all Christmas Eve when they finally got back on the ground. They had flown until Teddy's teeth were chattering, even with warming charms. Draco rode one of his old brooms from the shed and showed his cousin all the tips and tricks for steering the numbers 2001. By the end of the evening, Teddy was doing nosedives and corkscrews like a natural, much to Aunt Scissor's and Aunt Dromeda's dismay. Afterwards, they drank hot cocoa by the fire while Draco shared his old Slytherin playbooks and showed Teddy memories from his games in the family pensieve. It was the best Christmas Eve Draco had had in years, maybe ever. "Well, falling off and swallowing the snitch isn't a skill we can all have," Draco snorted. Potter smiled to himself.
"True. You're actually probably the better one to be teaching him Quidditch. You've got loads of years and talent on me."
"Hardly," Draco scoffed, rolling his eyes. While he enjoyed showing Teddy how to fly, the young boy had also continually yelled about how excited he was to show Uncle Harry everything he just learned.
No, really. Gryffindor did just fine when they lost me, but when Slytherin lost you, they weren't the same, Potter explained.
Draco considered Potter's point for a moment. It was fair, but he was still skeptical. Or Gryffindor was just a better team overall and wasn't being carried by the mediocre Seeker, Potter huffed.
Will you stop doing that?
Doing what?
Evading my compliments, he grumbled.
Draco could tell he was annoyed. That his classic Potter anger was bubbling up inside. But instead of the boy that threw hexes and started fights, he was now a man that knew to stop and think. That gave even pitiful Malfoy a chance at friendship. I'm not evading it. I'm just... Draco searched for the right wording. Saw things differently. Sometimes I still do.
Fine.
Potter rolled his eyes, but didn't continue to fire at it. Instead went to his paperwork. Draco watched the man across from him, the way his hair fell softly into his eyes, the lightning scar that was almost a beacon of comfort after all these years, how he sucked in his bottom lip and bit it as he scribbled on his parchment. Even in the quietest moments, Draco thought Potter was too beautiful for this world, that he was every nice quality thrown into a single human, that even his flaws guided his way to kindness. It made sense, because what Draco really meant to say was, I just don't deserve compliments from you. New Year's Eve.
Come on!
Draco felt a nudge on his shoulder and looked up to see Potter standing next to him, a smile on his lips. That was new, even a little shocking even, but it warmed Draco in a way he'd forgotten. We've got to finish this report, he grumbled, yet didn't truly mean it. Who wanted to do work on New Year's anyway?
It's 15 minutes until New Year. I think it can wait,
Potter said, a smile playing on his lips. He moved towards the office door.
Come on.
Draco stood from his desk and followed Potter out of the room. The hallways of the ministry were quiet. Most had gone to celebrate with their friends. Draco himself had been invited to the annual Zabini Gala and was a little bitter that their trainees had fucked up their paperwork so badly that he and Potter were still here trying to fix it all. Draco followed Potter into the lift and felt it move downward so quickly it made his stomach lurch. They stayed silent, standing side by side, hands in their pockets, eyes glancing sideways at the other and quickly looking away when caught. When the lift opened again, they were on the roof.
I still don't understand how magic works sometimes,
Potter chuckled at Draco's raised eyebrows. It's a bitch like that, Draco chuckled back. If Potter only knew. He followed the brunette onto the roof, hands still in his pocket, unsure just exactly what they were doing up here.
I should have told you to grab your cloak,
Potter murmured as an ice chill drifted through. It's all right, I run hot, Draco hummed. He noticed as winter set in that the cold no longer penetrated his skin. His blood had begun to boil inside of him and keep him warm during even the harshest snow. He supposed it was one perk to becoming closer to turning into a dragon. Potter pulled a carton of clove cigarettes from his pocket and put one between his lips. Draco reached over and lit it by snapping his fingers.
Oh, hey, thanks.
Potter stumbled over his words. Draco nodded and turned to look at the view around them. Wherever they were was tall enough to look down upon most of the buildings and streets. On another night it might have been quiet or just full of traffic, but tonight there was laughter and cheering in the air. There were parties full of people and live music from the other rooftops. There were friends and lovers, couples and families, everyone merry and full of happiness for the new year to come. If you only had a year to live, how would you spend it? Draco asked softly, barely aware he even asked aloud. He felt Potter move closer to him, their bodies almost touching side by side as they looked out at the world of happiness before them.
Destroy Horcruxes and save the Wizarding World?
Potter offered with a laughter in his voice. Draco snorted and rolled his eyes, looking over at the mischievous man next to him. Sounds taxing and honestly a little boring. Potter barked out a laugh, almost coughing on the smoke from a cigarette.
Merlin, it was. Never want to go camping again in my life.
Draco stole the cigarette and took a drag, his eyes moving back to the muggle parties filled with joy. A calm filled the air before the loud beats of counting.
3,
Potter joined the beats.
2.
And then the air filled with loud cheers and deafening blows. The sky lit with color, blasting in plumes of sparkles and bright extravaganza. Draco forgot about the cigarette as he took in the spectacle of muggle fireworks, lighting up the sky like their own sort of magic. He'd never seen Muggle fireworks before. He'd always figured they'd be lackluster and dull compared to the moving wizarding sort. But there was something so soft and elegant about the whistle of something to come, and then the blast of color and loud bang of life in the sky. Draco's eyes started to gloss over as each second broke his heart with bittersweet beauty. It was the beginning, and it was the end. More and more colors blasted through the air, piling on top of each other. Each boom rocked the rooftop and Draco saw. He glanced over to Potter to see the man not watching the sky, but him. Draco felt himself blush. A cold hand moved softly and cautiously into his warm one. Fingers interlaced, and a smile played on Potter's lips. Before Draco knew what Potter was doing, that smile touched his lips. A kiss so soft, so nervous, so scared. But it was there. Draco kissed back, just as soft, just as scared, just as devastatingly beautiful. After the kiss. When Draco returned home in the early morning, he stopped at the wall and turned the page of the calendar to a new kitten. It was a white snowball sort of thing sleeping in flowers. Underneath it, in pink cursive, was the worst advice he'd received yet.
"It's okay to cry. You still got this."
The white blonde man chuckled to himself. He didn't have this at all, not one bit. His chuckle turned into laughter. All he'd ever been taught was not to cry, never be weak, never. His laughter grew manic. He was dying, truly dying. His life as he knew it was coming to an end, and a kitten was saying that he had this. He shifted to lean against the wall as the manic laughter took over and wrecked his body. His side hurt and he felt like he was going to vomit. He was so close to getting everything he wanted. A job he enjoyed, friends that loved him. His family no longer broken by fear and violence. He felt tears in his eyes as the laughter broke his resolve. He slipped down the wall to the floor, pulling his legs close to his chest. He was so close to having the man he was never allowed to have. Potter had kissed him. Kissed and kissed for what felt like hours. Kissed like schoolboys until they had to part and get back to the dorms before curfew. He had felt his